All three, in one way or another, divided over the Revolution. The Loyalists represent the division between colonists, white colonists, right? There were the Patriots, who supported the Declaration of Independence, and the Loyalists, who supported maintaining ties with England. That's an important thing to note. I'll repeat that. The Patriots supported the Declaration of Independence, right? The declaring independence and starting a new nation. The Loyalists had people among their ranks who were in the Continental Congress who opposed the Stamp Act. Benjamin Franklin's son was a Loyalist. They are recognizing that England is the most representative government in Europe, and at the time, arguably the most representative government in the world. Right? It does have parliament. It has an elected body of leaders. Whereas France, for example, whom the Patriots align themselves with, an absolute monarchy, a Catholic monarchy, viewed very suspiciously. But there are still 20 to 25% of the colonists, white colonists, that are loyalists, that remain loyalists throughout the war. New York City is a noticeable hotbed of loyalist activism. After the war, which they obviously lose, the Declaration of Independence is signed. A war goes on for several years, ends with the Treaty of Paris in 1783, where England relinquishes control of these 13 colonies, which now become 13 states. 100,000 loyalists, 100,000 loyalists were banished or voluntarily immigrated to Nova Scotia, to the Caribbean, where England still has control. The British Empire is actually going to get much larger after the Revolution, not smaller. They consolidate control in India and other places like that. So they go to Canada, they go to the Caribbean, they go back to England. 20,000 of these 100,000 loyalists were slaves who make their way to the same places, but also eventually establish, if you see at the bottom there, Sierra Leone in 1787. So Sierra Leone is established basically in Africa. It's a country still to this day, was established for black loyalists who did not want to return to a life of slavery. For the Indians, Native Americans, if you want to use the term Native Americans, some people say Amerindians. Foner goes with Indian. Every single one of these classifications has pros and cons. So the Indians, he refers to a section in this chapter as the Indians' Revolution. Primarily, I think he focuses on the Iroquois Confederacy, which at this point is comprised of 6 Indian nations. They split over the Revolution. I believe 4 Indian nations of the 6 side with the British, 2 with the Americans. Most Indians side with the British, just like they sided with the French in the 7 Years' War, the French Indian War. For similar reasons, the proclamation of 1763, that line of demarcation, the British were going to regulate colonists from expanding west. The Indians see in the British some sort of protection, some sort of check against the aggression of white colonists moving onto their land, or land that they want to continue using. Patriots, many of these Americans, particularly the ones that fought in the war, see the land that is west, as uninhabited, as theirs for the taking. They see several of the tribes that are still east of the Mississippi, particularly tribes within the Iroquois Confederacy, that sided with the British, and point to that as justification for taking their land, basically. In 1790, there are 200,000 still east of the Mississippi River. So that's a substantial number, right? 200,000. There are about 250,000 slaves in the 13 colonies at this point. So is around the time Jefferson states that the only hope for these Native Americans is to move west of the Mississippi, right? To move west. There were too many colonists that saw this land as being theirs for the taking. If you look at a map in 1782, there's a good one in 1782, right? They're basically claiming all of this land. So that's something that's going to be a problem. Even when the government of the United States attempts to sign treaties with Indian nations, those treaties are going to be broken by settlers, American settlers, moving on to Indian land, causing lots of issues. So Yorktown, in 1781, when the British surrender, there are 500 escaped slaves in Yorktown. Many of them, belonged to Washington and Jefferson. I believe 15 or 20 altogether were actually slaves that ran away from Monticello and Mount Vernon. They are returned. Slave catchers, 100,000 slaves escaped to British lines during the American Revolution, right? So 20,000 of those, as mentioned before, leave. There is abolition in the North, right? This is how we end up with the Civil War at the end of this class, because slavery, which is not as prevalent in the North, but still it exists. Slavery is going to be abolished in the North slowly. The years here listed are 1777 to 1804. But I mean, there's still slaves in New York, in places like New York, as late as 1830, 1840. There are 8 slaves listed as living in New Jersey as late as 1860. Because even if you agree to some sort of gradual emancipation, that gradual emancipation could be when I die and when my children have all died, you can all be free. Or to the slaves themselves, well, you're going to work for me the rest of your life, and your kids are going to work for me for the rest of their lives. But any of your grandkids, when your grandkids are born, they'll be free, or something. But you end up with 200,000 by 1810, 200,000 free blacks. The roughly 500,000 free black Americans on the eve of the Civil War, at the end of this class, are going to be the descendants of these folks that got their freedom during the Revolution.